Sorry, don't ask me.
May I now request Dr. Swamy to give his remarks.
Vice Chancellor Professor Quamar, Professor Kumaraswamy and Dr. Quamar, and of course our distinguished diplomat, Mr. Sanjay Singh. First of all, I'm very happy to be here. Normally I come in a combative mood to JNU, but this is clearly an academic thing, so I'll deal with ideas. And I'm very happy that you have written a book on Saudi Arabia. And I think you have correctly pointed out that the present government's intention is to go on developing relations with countries like Saudi Arabia. By the way, I must correct you as I'm prone to do. We are not the 6th or 5th largest GDP country, we are 3rd largest. You are still living in the era of using exchange rates to convert GDP. We know more to it. It's based on purchasing power parity, and we are 3rd largest. Of course, per capita wise, we are pretty far down. Now, there is a fundamental difference in approach between defense policy and foreign policy. A distinction which Jawaharlal Nehru didn't make, and that's why he came to grief in 1962. Foreign policy, we just look at the intention of the other countries. And in defense policy, we look at the capacity of different countries. We therefore, if we feel that the Chinese are well disposed towards their intentions are good, we will pursue relations with China. But but at the same time we discover that they are developing their military capacity, we'll try to match that to the extent that we can. So this is a book on foreign policy, so I will not get into the question how we should regard a country if it goes rogue or turns against us and so on. That's not a issue of concern here. Now, in his book, Professor Kumaraswamy and Quamar have, it's a wonderful library book because he has brought into the book many things which are good from a comparative point of view. All the joint communications have been included in the appendix, and that tells you by reading each one of them the trend that has taken place in our relations with Saudi Arabia. Now, we are now essentially question of how we are looking at the West Asia is in terms not so much of how much oil we can get. That's not our government's approach to the extent I understand it. But it's more an understanding that the world should not end up in a clash of civilizations, and particularly in a clash of religions. We have 3 countries to balance. One is a Sunni Muslim country, that's Saudi Arabia. The other is a Shia Muslim country, Iran. And the third is Israel. And I don't think you can put the 3 of them in one room and not see some bloodshed taking place inside. They are all 3 mutually antagonistic countries. But we have good relations with all of them. And we intend to maintain it with Israel because there is a long history of their support to us, even when we didn't recognize them. In the Indo-Pakistan war, they gave us spares, and in one case, when after the Soviet Union unraveled, we didn't have spares for our T-72 tanks. The Israelis cannibalized the Czechoslovakian T-72 tanks and gave us the spare parts. So Israel has been very strongly supportive of India, whatever their national interest reasons might be, but the fact is they have been supportive. They've been extremely helpful to us in in information on terror, and they probably have the best data than anyone else in the world. So our commitment as BJP to Israel is complete and total, and that will not change. In order to improve our relations with any other country, we will not dilute our relations with Israel. That's one fundamental principle we have. The second thing is that irrespective of what the United States might think, we will maintain our relations with Iran, because Iran is strategically very important for us. We think that if tomorrow we are forced to fill the vacuum in Afghanistan, Iran is an extremely important country for us in terms of moving our supplies and looking after the provisions of the army. And so Iran is a country which we may not beat our chest about it, supporting them, but we have very strong commitment to maintain our relations with Iran. Saudi Arabia, we thought, was a tough nut to crack, because we thought that they being a religious state would not be very accommodative in some of the things we do. We have from time to time a problem which the world perceives as more serious than it really is, and that's the Hindu-Muslim problem. And the Saudi Arabians have expressed concerns to us in private about it. But that was not the reason. We thought that they were so intimately connected with the United States that and so terribly opposed to Israel that they would not have good relations with us. But we were totally surprised when they allowed us to fly Air India over Saudi Arabia, which they have not allowed any other country. In fact, we are now being pressed by Israel to persuade the Saudi Arabians to allow El Al to fly over them, because it becomes so much cheaper. And of course, we have not made any attempts. But we hope over the years all these antagonisms will go. But I'm saying that the gesture that Saudi Arabia has made has warmly touched us, and we are now convinced that this is a country with which we can do business both in emotional terms, cultural terms, and so on. We have almost 20 lakh workers in Saudi Arabia, or 1.8 million? So 3.6. My God, I'm out of date. Huh? 2.6. Anyway, it's a large number. And I think the economy of Kerala survives on that. It will otherwise collapse. So, subject to their internal requirements and conditions, most of our people there do not feel unhappy being there, and they've been there for years and years. Many of them, very few come back. So therefore, we have many other interests also, the economic interests, the oil, etc. But oil, we never know how long it will be a useful item, because the research that is going on at the pace it is going on hydrogen fuel cells and alternative fuels for vehicles and so on. Well, it might be one of these days oil might become, like coal is rapidly becoming, a out-of-date fuel. So how to bring about a balance between these three centers. One is a Jewish center, the other is a Sunni center, and the third is, of course, a Shia center. And we have all three religions in our country, and we want to be friendly with all three. They recently, I must say, I'm very sorry that the Saudi Arabian ambassador is not here. This is Saudar, but I have had many interactions with him. He's one of the smartest diplomats I've seen outside Indian diplomats, of course. But now he and I have talked at very great length, and you would be surprised, as the first person who educated me that in Saudi Arabia they demolish mosques, not unauthorizedly. Nobody has right to unauthorizedly or take a mob and demolish any masjid. But as a government for development work, they are continuously doing that, because he explained to me what the theology of a masjid is in their scheme of things. Of course, there are one or two exceptions like Makkah and perhaps Al-Aqsa. But the general is that in Islamic view, it's a place for congregation and to read namaz, but by itself it's not something that they hold so sacred that it can't be touched. That we have not made it, it's not part of our public idiom, but privately when we speak to Muslim groups in the question of the Ram Janmabhoomi, it's come very, very useful. And a very large number of people privately say, we can't publicly come out and support, but we'll be supportive. So I think even for our internal harmony, countries like Iran and Iran, of course, the Shias and the rest of India, particularly the Hindu population, have always had very good relations. You have to visit Lucknow to see how good it is. But as far as the Sunni relationship is, it is because of what happened with creation of Pakistan, it has had a problem. So I'm saying in terms of developing India's stable base, the skill with which we are able to keep all these three countries as friends is going to be extremely important. And there is bilaterally no problem with Iran, there is bilaterally no problem with Israel. Saudi Arabia was the new element, and therefore doing research on it is extremely important for our country. So I would say that therefore we have to, and the impact of this would be that some of the developing events might necessitate using all three countries to help us in meeting that development. One development could be the Americans walking out of Afghanistan. And Iran is as a direct any roadways or railways or whatever access to Afghanistan. I mean, assuming that the hostility with Pakistan will continue. And Iran has become that way also very important. Saudi Arabia has been very helpful to us in secret on terror. They have been extremely helpful, and that's a very big plus for us, because we certainly would like to see that terror, dealing with terror, the religious part is as much separated as possible, and the more Islamic countries help us in this, the more easy it is for us to put it across. So all said and done, I would say that what the projection for us is, if India is to become a global power, we are already in the first three: United States, China, India. United States is going out from here. They are tired of sending troops to various places. So that leaves us with China and India. And of course, historically, we have had very good relations with China. And I have always been of the view that the animosity that has developed since '62 is a outlier. It's not a part of the general trend. China is extremely important in developing a stable Asia, and therefore we should maintain relations with China by not getting involved in trilateral problems of China. That is, if the United States and China have a problem, we should sort of stay out. And I may tell you a personal anecdote. In 1977, when the Janata came to power, Morarji Desai, one of the most anti-Chinese persons that could be, he became Prime Minister. But for some reason, he had a change of heart, I think. And he knew my interest in China and how much I have studied the country. So he asked me, is there any way we can improve our relations with China? So I said, what do you mean by improvement? He said, at least they should accept that the territory that they have taken away from us is disputed. Because at that time the idiom was that this is part and parcel of China, and they will not yield an inch. So I told him that the only way he could do it is if you help them when they are a bit in difficulty. And he said, what difficulty are there? And I said, there's a river in Russia and China border called Ussuri River. And there's an island there called Janbadao, which the Chinese claim is theirs. And the Russians are ready to go to war for that. So he said, how are we concerned? I said, we are concerned because we have an Indo-Soviet treaty. And that says that if Russia gets into a war situation, we have to help them. And they've already made a request to allow them to send their troops into India and go to Tibet from below as a contingency. So you should say no. And the Chinese should know that you have said no. So he said, but we are non-aligned. I said, yes, but you got this treaty. He said, but that treaty was done by Mrs. Gandhi. What we have got to do with it? He said, you tell the Chinese that. So he asked me to go to China. That's how my first initiative of going to China, later on getting Kailash Manso open. So in a sense, since then, whatever commitments the Chinese have made, including not interfering in any movement in Assam, which was made in my meeting with Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese have kept it. I was recently in Northeast, and I asked our Air Force people, do you see any Chinese planes flying into our? He said, not one case there. They have never violated our airspace. So I think the Chinese would be a very stable friend for us, provided we know how to deal with them. And the Middle East is an extraordinarily important area, and in this the three main players are these, and we have got now relations with them. The Saudi Arabian relation needs to be developed much more. We don't know when Trump will dump Saudi Arabia, so we should take that opportunity. And India should emerge not as a South Asian country, as you correctly said, or all the time worrying about bilateral problems. We should now start thinking in terms of multilateral problems and playing a role in that. And if we go to the UN, we should never speak about Kashmir and never speak about Pakistan. We should pretend it doesn't exist. So that way we can develop a profile which is necessary. And I think your book, for me reading it, filled in gaps which were large, and you have covered a ground right from the beginning to the end. And so I hope you write one more book. Thank you.